Everybody. My name is Mike Towers. I'm the Chief Security and Trust Officer here at Veza, and I'm excited to be part of this Non-Human Identity Summit in partnership with the Cloud Security Alliance. And today we're tackling what I think is one of the most critical security challenges in 2025 and beyond, is the paradox of the power of AI, but also the risks it presents. I was talking to a CISO the other day who was bringing up the scenario where AI was really, really powerful in allowing her and her team to identify an indicator of compromise looking at a bunch of data. But then that same AI algorithm introduced something like 20, 25,000 false positives. So just it's one little example of this quandary, this paradox, if you will. And is AI solving an identity problem or is it contributing to it? And the bottom line is it's doing both. And with machine identities outnumbering human identities 20 to 1, and that's set to double according to Gartner over the past couple of years. This is one of the most defining security challenges that we have. And as you can see, credit to Gartner here and also some McKinsey data that this is highlighting, but AI is one of the top strategic priorities that we have, but its security challenges are the number 2 risk that we have to mitigate in leveraging AI. As AI adoption accelerates, frankly, so does our exposure, because as we'll talk a little bit about this, is that AI needs to have access to a lot of data to learn and to behave properly and to act accordingly. And this isn't a coincidence. The business pressure to leverage AI is in many respects outpacing our ability to keep up from a control perspective. And you can see on this next chart here that you're starting to look at some really, really interesting focus on the mitigation of inaccuracy, IP infringement, privacy risks, explainability. All of these things that are important risks to mitigate are also top of mind. Again, balancing the benefits of AI with the challenges that it presents to most of us across all industries and all sectors, and frankly, all shapes, sizes, and geographies when we're trying to leverage AI here. Now, bringing this back from an identity perspective, in many respects, it's kind of the perfect storm. So we've been making and we've been abiding by and living within identity assumptions for a long time about identities being human, that we can see what's happening, that access patterns are predictable, et cetera. But we built these systems around those assumptions. But in reality, these AI agents are operating at a superhuman level of speed. Leveraging enterprise data and in many respects sensitive data is critical for accuracy and frankly for productivity as well as business impact. And it's really, really challenging our permission structures and permissions needs, et cetera, and permissions assumptions. And so we're faced with questions like, how do I enable my workforce with AI tools while still protecting my enterprise data? And that is a challenge in and of itself. And again, back to some of the non-human identity areas that we're talking about, the complexity that brings. We're already drowning in non-human identities. And like I said before, at the rate of 20 to 1 and growing. And with agentic AI expectations and more AI expectations, those numbers are only getting higher. And think about a very common instantiation of AI nowadays is Microsoft Copilot. A Microsoft Copilot needs access to SharePoint and frankly wants to have a lot of access to everything users can see. And if you have that forgotten folder, if you have that stale data or whatever, that these agents and these search engines are going to be sprawling or whatever to train and learn, you're going to expose data that you never intended to. And the blast radius of a compromised AI agent is bigger and larger than anything we've ever seen before. So the good news is that the industry is mobilizing. So you have a few industry response initiatives here. You see Anthropic's multi-channel protocol there on the top left. It's basically the USB-C for AI applications, if you will. And it's being developed as a standard interface for agents to connect to access and to access resources. And then you see Google's A2A work that's going on. And that protocol addresses how multiple AI agents are going to communicate. People may ask the natural question about which one of these is going to win out. The bottom line is they're both going to be important. And then you have other companies are innovating to leverage Entra. They're leveraging some of the GitLab composite identities work. Workday's done some really, really interesting work on agent system of records. There's a Maestro framework coming out from Cloud Security Alliance to help specifically identify and highlight how we access and how we govern AI. So all of these threat modeling frameworks and other areas that are going on, and the industry is rallying to try to get ahead of this and try to address this as best as we can, but recognizing the speed and expectations of AI are driving this at, frankly, it's one of those hype cycles that's really, really quick and one of the quickest that I've ever seen. So AI, frankly, is nothing without data, and how organizations use their data in these AI environments is something that we need to really, really think about and understand some of these patterns. So one of the most common, and frankly, what we see the expected focus will be is in a RAG type approach, retrieval augmented generation, where you're going to have enterprise search capabilities that are kind of like running and learning and getting this data. There's, one of the reasons why this is probably going to be the most common and most consistent model, at least for the foreseeable future, is that it maintains permission boundaries while enabling AI capabilities. And there are some limits, but you do get the AI benefits, at least as a starting point, without breaking a lot of the security models that we've been building over the years. So it's a really, really powerful and important first step. And you can leverage enterprise search capabilities. You can leverage user knowledge and at least have some level of understanding of how the search scope is going to work and how the data is going to be leveraged, how you're going to be able to select documents based on prompts and tasks. And these are being built into standard tools like Copilot and Gemini that are obviously really common across the user base. And they're limited today from a text perspective, but that will grow. But at least it gives us the parameters within a security model that we understand. Now, moving forward, what we see is that at a macro level, there's going to be three types of AI agent identities, if you will. And the first is basically a personal agent. This is basically your Copilot, your Gemini type of things, where this is in essence, this is an agent mimicking an end user, if you will. So this is in essence, you have enterprise policy overlays that can provide additional permission restrictions, but the permissions are defined by what the end user can or should have access to. And the agent identity is captured and distinguished within the ecosystem. We'll talk about that shortly because that's one of the challenges and boundaries of this model. But this is basically an agent acting like an end user. Then you have an agent acting like an application or a robot or some sort of automated task, if you will. Maybe you call it a macro on steroids, or for a while, many organizations have been dealing with robotic process automation, RPI. So this is basically an agent acting like a workflow or a repeatable tasks. So these are, in essence, they're operated like service accounts, and they're closer to a quote unquote application than a user. They tend to operate outside of a traditional user context. And this is where we have a lot of overlap with NHIs and workload identities that we've seen and that we're currently dealing with. And then last, we see a type emerging around browser agents. So OpenAI and Claude Computer User operates this way, where you're connecting via some sort of browser user interface. The biggest challenge with this approach and this type, frankly, is that it's really, really tough to distinguish between human and machine actions. And therefore, a lot of the tools will look at some of this access as normal. And there's going to likely be limited enterprise deployment initially because of some of those issues. So what are some of the implications that we see for how these AI agent identity areas will evolve? We see, frankly, the dual and composite identity model is winning out in the short term, which is basically going to be agents linked to some sort of human identity. So that therefore that personal agent I mentioned will likely be the common initial model in most enterprises because it is the closest to our existing security and access model. So crawl, walk, run, we can address it and we can use it with some level of the scale and the speed are, of course, different. The data access challenges I mentioned are vast, but at least it operates within a construct that we're in some respects have existing models that can help with. It's dependent and relies heavily on human permissions. The person who's invoking the agent will be the permissions that are actually leveraged. And it adds on to the agent permissions that can be used additionally to restrict access from some sort of corporate identity security, some sort of corporate policy perspective. And we're going to try our best to figure out how to track this agent activity And within ecosystems, this tracking and this understanding and this logging is valid and it is feasible. So you have your Copilot within Microsoft, you have your Gemini within Google, you have your system specific or ecosystem specific use cases. The challenge is that when we're crossing ecosystem boundaries, this will present issues. So how do we, and this is going to be one of those common areas where, you have your personal productivity data, and you have your office data in one environment, then you have your business operations data in another environment. That's going to present challenges crossing those boundaries between those two types of ecosystems. You see, GitLab has come up with a composite ID structure to try to address this, and more of these systems and these capabilities will launch and will evolve. So, with all these issues and all these challenges and the rapid pace that this is coming, let's talk a little bit about some practical recommendations. So, the area to focus, as we mentioned, enterprise personal agents will be the one that will likely be the most prolific in the near term. Is we have to continue to focus on least privilege. So least privilege is an area that we should be focusing on today for any end user. Users, in theory, and we try our best, we call it zero trust sometimes, but we want to have users have the minimum number of access they need to do their job. That is on steroids, if you will, when you talk about AI agents, because this is going to supercharge their ability to search and find outlier data. Any kind of issues or over permissioning in an AI world is going to have a tremendously bigger scope, because the amount of activity, the amount of data it can access is much broader and much quicker. So it's really, really important that we double down on least privilege at scale across these environments. I mentioned the browser agent thing coming a little bit later, but we want to, it's less likely due to some of the challenges between distinguishing human and agent activity, but there's areas like EDR and other conditional access type of capabilities that are evolving. There's some browser isolation and some secure browser stuff that will be important here. And then on the app agent side, this is basically the system to system types of things I mentioned, the robotic types of approaches. This is all about NHI security. And for many organizations, the first step continues to be around discovery, understanding and securing your service accounts, understanding your API keys. Where are your secrets? Are they being rotated? This is real, true NHI type of discipline, which again fundamentally starts with visibility. We can't protect what we don't see. So first and foremost, across all of your platforms, is to get a strong and a consistent view of how your NHIs are being used across your environment. And let's recognize, frankly, that it's more than just how they're authenticating and the secrets they're using. They're very, very important. But it's also important that we focus on the permissions and actions that those NHIs can take as well. So thank you for your time. I hope that was helpful, and let's work together on addressing agentic AI as proactively as possible. This train is coming, it's moving fast, so let's work together to secure it as proactively and as best as we can to allow and enable our businesses to benefit from the vast opportunities that AI is giving us. Thank you.